Some people leave without closing the door. He left with silence, and somehow that was louder. The sheets were still warm. The room still smelled like pine tar and old memories. I didn't regret it. I regretted waiting this long. The sheets were still warm, the room too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. I didn't regret it. I regretted waiting this long. That morning sunlight didn't feel like mercy. Felt like exposure. I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what I'd done, and I'd do it again. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free, the way someone forgotten might feel, the first time they're called by name again. My name is Marion. I'm 62. It's been 7 years since my husband passed, and I still pour 2 cups of tea each evening. One for me. One for the man who no longer sits across the table. I used to be a nurse in the emergency wing, trained to stop bleeding, not to hold hands. There's something in that work that makes you good at saving lives, and terrible at keeping one of your own. After retirement, I bought a small cedar frame house tucked into the edge of a quiet Kentucky valley. No neighbors close enough to ask how I've been. No reason to check the calendar unless the electricity bill came late. The air here is thick with silence, and I've grown used to hearing my own loneliness echo between walls. Most days pass like water under a frozen creek, slow, cold, uneventful. Until one afternoon in early spring, when I heard the sound of knuckles on wood. 3 steady knocks. Not urgent. Not unfamiliar. I opened the door. And there he was. Eli. The boy I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. He'd once sat in my hospital bed after losing his mother to anaphylaxis. I held his hand through the night she stopped breathing. He didn't cry. Just stared at me like I owed him answers no 12-year-old should ever need. Then he disappeared into foster care, and eventually, into the blur of faces that time erases. But now he stood on my porch with wind-stung cheeks, longer hair, and a ladder slung over his shoulder like a half-kept promise. "You know your roof's leaking, right?" he asked, smiling like he'd never left. I froze for a moment, not from surprise, but from the recognition of something still unfinished. "And you remember how to find this place?" I asked, folding my arms. He nodded. I remembered the maple tree, and the smell of cinnamon toast. I laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the throat, but shivers in your chest. It had been years since someone remembered anything about me. He climbed up without asking, patched the worst of the leak, and said he'd be back the next day to fix the rest. I should have said no. I should have thanked him politely and closed the door. But I didn't. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, and listened to the soft drip still coming from the eaves outside. And for the first time in years I didn't mind the sound. It reminded me of footsteps that might return. The next evening he came again. And the next. Each time something small changed. A look that lingered too long. A question that didn't belong in casual conversation. The space between us shortened, not in inches, but in the weight of silences we no longer rushed to fill. I didn't ask why he really came back. I didn't ask what he saw when he looked at me now. But I felt it. Not desire. Not yet. Just recognition. The kind that hums beneath your ribs when someone remembers a version of you that even you had forgotten. I didn't mean to let Eli stay in my life again. But a ladder and a look and a soft knocking kind of presence made it harder to remember how I'd kept people out for so long. There's a certain rhythm to quiet company. At first it's just the sound of shared space. Tools clinking in a toolbox, a kettle whistling, 2 chairs creaking on a wooden porch. But then something shifts. The silence becomes more than lack of noise. It starts humming. Eli kept coming back. First to finish the roof. Then to fix the flickering kitchen light. Then simply because I stopped asking why. I cooked dinner. He did the dishes. We didn't speak much, not about anything real. Just the weather, the way squirrels burrowed into the garden beds too early that year. But every evening we ended up on the porch sharing a mug of tea that was always too hot at first, and too cold by the end. And then it began. I started counting the hours before he'd knock again. Started laying out clothes in the morning. Soft fabrics, lavender scented. Things I hadn't worn in years. Not because they were flattering, but because they made me feel more awake. Sometimes I'd find him already waiting on the steps, coat off, sleeves rolled, hands smelling faintly of pine tar and something deeper, something that stayed on my fingers long after we said goodnight. He stopped calling me Miss Marion. Now it was just Marion. Less polite. More real. There was a moment, small, unremarkable to anyone else, when I reached for a jar of turmeric on the top shelf. I hadn't used it in years. Didn't need it. But I reached anyway. Eli stepped behind me. Quiet. Intentional. His hand moved as if to steady the shelf but hovered just a breath too close to my hip. I felt warmth. Not pressure. Stillness. Not restraint. And I didn't move. Not away. There was no apology in the way he stood. No hesitation either. Just the suggestion of presence closer than it needed to be. I could have shifted, cleared my throat, made some small domestic joke. But I didn't. I just stood there. Let the moment hang like steam above a cooling cup. I told myself it meant nothing. That it was an accident. But my hands trembled slightly as I poured tea that evening. And I spilled more than I drank. Later I watched him from the kitchen, through the thin curtain separating us. He was seated at the table, reading something with a furrowed brow. I couldn't see the words, just the slow tapping of his fingers on the wood. Through the fabric he looked softer. Unformed. Like memory trying to become real. There's a type of closeness that doesn't announce itself. It just starts breathing in sync with you without asking. That week the same song played on the record player, Chet Baker's Almost Blue. 3 times in a row. Not on purpose. But I didn't stop it. That song again? He asked once, half smiling. I could have changed it. But the scratch in Baker's voice mirrored something in my own chest. I just said, some things deserve to be heard twice. Or maybe 3 times. Or maybe until you no longer wince when the note breaks. That night when he left, I stayed by the doorway longer than usual. His jacket had brushed mine on the way out, nothing more. But I could still feel the air where he'd passed. I didn't sleep right away. I sat on the porch barefoot, letting the cold floor remind me I was still grounded. That I hadn't crossed anything yet. But I'd come close. The next time he stood that near I wasn't sure I'd stay still. Or if I'd move even closer. The rain began as a whisper, barely more than a brush of sound on the window glass. It had been dry for weeks, and yet the moment Eli pulled the screen door shut behind him, the clouds opened like they had been holding their breath too long. He brought his old guitar inside. I hadn't seen it before, but the case was worn soft around the edges, like it had been carried through too many homes without a song. He didn't ask if he could play. He just sat by the fire, tuned one string slowly, and let the notes drift out like half-formed thoughts. I listened from the kitchen, pretending to rinse a mug that had already been clean. His chords were unsteady, delicate, even hesitant. The kind of playing that isn't meant for performance. Just confession. When I stepped into the room, the light caught the steam rising from the teapot behind me, making everything feel suspended. Still. Too still. Do you ever think about her? I asked, barely above the crackle of the fireplace. He paused, not surprised by the question. I do, he said. But I think about you more. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. There was space between us, but not the kind that keeps people apart. The kind that waits deliberately. He kept playing, fingers moving slowly over the strings, and I let myself sink into the couch beside him, one cushion away. Not because I was tired, but because standing meant choosing distance. And I didn't want that tonight. The melody faltered. He looked down, then quietly asked, "Do you want me to go?" I should have said yes. I should have reminded him of the years, the roles, the names people would put between us if they saw. But instead, I reached for the thin shawl draped over the armrest and wrapped it around my shoulders, as if covering myself might make the choice invisible. He didn't move closer. But he didn't leave. "I'm not trying to take anyone's place," he said. I see you. I always did." No one had said that to me in years, not without obligation in their voice, not without pity. My throat tightened, not with grief, but with the ache of being seen as someone whole. I turned slightly, enough that our knees nearly touched, and in that small space between breath and silence, I heard the rain tap faster against the windows. A syncopation. A kind of approval. I reached to adjust the clasp of my robe. One button had slipped, as it always did. He didn't offer to fix it. But I felt his gaze pause there. Not in hunger but in recognition. We stayed like that for a long while. No words. No deliberate movement. Just the fire crackling, the rain playing back up, and a kind of stillness that felt like a door with the lock undone, waiting for someone to turn the knob. I don't remember who leaned in first. Only that when I closed my eyes it wasn't out of fear. It was out of return. I let myself rest against him, beside him, not as a patient, not as a widow, not as anyone's anything. Just Marion. Not because I was weak, but because I had been strong for far too long. That night I didn't sleep, not because of what happened but because of what I finally let happen. The morning didn't arrive so much as it crept. No music. No laughter. Just that still, muted hush that settles after something irreversible. The sky hung gray over the porch, draping the house in a light too pale to be comforting. I stood in the kitchen, watching steam rise from the 2 cups of tea I had prepared out of habit, mine lukewarm, his untouched. There were no footsteps. No familiar sound of him adjusting the chair or absent-mindedly tuning the old guitar. Just the slow tick of the clock and the occasional sigh of the floorboards cooling in the morning air. The house had never felt this loud in its silence. Eli appeared eventually, by the edge of the porch, his jacket wrinkled, hands deep in his pockets like he was bracing against something colder than the wind. He didn't look at me. When he finally spoke, it wasn't a greeting. It was a reset. "Morning, Miss Marion." Not Marion. Not the name he'd said just hours earlier in a whisper against the dark. That soft reattachment of formality hit sharper than it should have. Not cruel. Just distancing. As if we'd stepped back into roles we no longer remembered how to play. I didn't reply. Just watched him from behind the sheer curtain that divided the kitchen from the porch. A thin veil. A fragile screen. A perfect metaphor. I reached for the dishes, last night's plates still in the sink. I washed them slowly. Too slowly. Each plate took longer than it needed to. I dried them twice. I needed the distraction. Or maybe I needed to pretend things could be wiped clean that easily. I could feel him behind me, not moving, not stepping in. Just existing like a shadow I'd invited and could no longer dismiss. "Eli," I said, voice steadier than I felt. He didn't answer right away. I could hear the faint creak of the porch rail as he shifted weight. "Yes, ma'am." That word again. Ma'am. Like a curtain falling between us. "If you regret it." "I don't." His answer was fast. But not full. He looked down, then out toward the woods behind the house. "I don't regret it. I don't know what I am to you now." I let that settle. Because truthfully I didn't know either. What did you call someone who had seen you completely, and still didn't know where to stand the next morning? What name fit between guilt and longing? I wasn't naive. I didn't expect poetry or promises. But I hadn't expected the quiet to be so brutal. I sat down slowly, hands still wrapped in the towel, though they were dry. The chair across from me was empty. He didn't move to fill it. We stayed like that. 2 people in the same room occupying different air. The only sound came from the wind brushing against the screen door. A soft flapping like pages turning without anyone reading them. I stared at the teaspoon still resting on the saucer he hadn't used. It had fogged slightly from the cooling tea. The kind of detail you'd only notice when looking too long, too hard, for something to focus on that wasn't him. From my angle, I could see his reflection faintly in the window. Not clearly. A shimmer behind the glass. He looked younger. Or perhaps I just looked older now, in the morning's sharp light. He didn't step in. I didn't ask him to. Instead, we stayed suspended, mid-thought, mid-motion, like dancers waiting for the next note of a song that might not return. That morning, we didn't speak of what we had crossed. We simply let the quiet do the naming. I found it by accident. A birthday card, long forgotten, slipped between old tax papers and expired coupons. The handwriting was clumsy, half boy, half man. For Miss Marion, the only one who remembered I like cinnamon butter toast. I stared at the card so long the ink seemed to lift, like breath on cold glass. It was a detail no one should have remembered. Not unless they were watching even then. I never told anyone I made that exact toast the morning of Eli's 10th birthday, 2 weeks after his mother died. I'd left it in the staff break room. No note. Just the plate. He never asked who made it. But someone had remembered. Later that afternoon, Eli walked in holding a small cardboard box wrapped in twine. He didn't say anything, just placed it in front of me on the kitchen table. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a faded leather-bound notebook. My handwriting on the inside cover smudged but still legible. For when you don't have the words yet. It was the journal I gave him that winter. I had forgotten. He hadn't. He looked at me, then away. I wrote in it. Not every day. But when I missed you. When I didn't know how to say it. My fingers brushed the edge of the cover. It trembled slightly, not from the cold, though the room did feel colder, but from the weight of what he just handed me. A timeline of unsaid things. A ledger of memory. I opened to a page at random. Saw a woman today who wore her hair like hers. I almost cried and told her thank you. But she wouldn't have understood. Another. I think I love the quiet because that's where I heard her voice best. She always spoke softer when no one else was around. I shut the notebook gently, as if it contained a bird I'd set loose by mistake. I wanted to ask, why now? But the words stayed behind my teeth. Instead I said, you kept it all this time? He nodded. I didn't know if I was allowed to, but I couldn't throw it away. We sat like that, dust curling around us like steam. The kitchen light above flickered once, then steadied. A small betrayal of the house's age, or maybe of mine. For a moment, I felt older than I'd ever felt. Not from years, but from the knowledge that he had built an entire private world around a version of me I didn't know still lived. A breath caught in my chest. Not quite grief. Not quite joy. Just was it love? Was it gratitude shaped into something warmer, more dangerous? Or was it projection, his need to anchor somewhere, anywhere, after so many years of being unmoored? I didn't know. But I knew what I saw in his eyes that night by the porch light. I knew the way his voice changed when he said my name, not Miss Marion, not ma'am, just Marion, like it belonged to no one but me. I had looked into many eyes in my life. Some pleading, some fading, some furious with unfairness. But never one that looked at me like I was still becoming something. Not finished. Still in bloom. Still worth watching. Maybe it wasn't love. Maybe it was recognition. Or worse, reflection. I couldn't tell what scared me more. He reached across the table, not to grab my hand but to turn the notebook back toward himself. But for one breath, his knuckle brushed mine. We both froze. I didn't move. Neither did he. Then he whispered, if this is wrong I'll stop. But I needed you to know it's always been you. Even when I didn't have the words. The porch creaked under the weight of wind. A glass clinked gently in the sink, as if answering for me. I didn't say yes. But I didn't stand up either. That night I didn't sleep. Not because of guilt. But because of how much I didn't want to rewind. That evening I didn't close the front gate. I didn't switch off the porch light. I didn't wear the robe that covered everything, even my breathing. I sat by the window as twilight sank into the wooden frames. The lamplight flickered softly across the kitchen tiles, leaving corners unlit, like secrets I hadn't decided to share yet. Eli came as he always did. Quiet steps, shoulders hunched against the breeze, but without hesitation this time. He paused under the porch like he was reading the air between us. I didn't get up to greet him. I didn't speak. Just let the screen door creak open behind him. Let the sound say what I couldn't. He sat beside me just close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. Not touching, not even brushing, but aware. Fully aware. The space between our hands felt heavier than it should. I placed mine flat on the wooden armrest, let my fingers hang slightly over the edge. His fingers mirrored mine almost. Just a breath apart. We watched the wind tug the porch curtain. The fabric moved like it was exhaling something held far too long. And then I said it, not as confession but as truth. I don't need to be looked after. He nodded once slowly. Not surprised. I know. I swallowed. My throat felt lined with old silk, dry but fragile. I just need to be seen. Not as someone's wife. Or someone's mother. Or someone who knows how to fold grief into neat compartments. His reply came after a pause. A silence that didn't press, only offered space. You are. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't poetry. It was simply true. He didn't try to take my hand, but I moved mine anyway. Not towards him, but not away either. Just enough for our pinkies to almost touch. And it was in that tension that I understood. What we had crossed wasn't a line of propriety, it was a line of silence. A line of self-erasure I had stood behind for years. "I'm not asking you to stay," I said quietly. "Not like this." He turned to me, his face partly shadowed by the porch light, and in that layered play of brightness and dusk, he looked not younger but lighter, like someone who had put something down. "I didn't come to stay," he said. "I came because you left the door open." I smiled, not because it was romantic. It wasn't. It was real. "I'm Marion," I whispered. "Not Mrs. Whitaker. Not Mom. Not Nurse. Just Marion." And for the first time in what felt like decades, the word didn't taste like shame or apology. It just tasted like me. That night we sat there in silence. The distance between us full of breath and possibility. Not touching. Not naming. Just choosing. Not rightness. Not wrongness. But aliveness. A moth landed on the porch rail, fluttering once before settling in the yellow glow. I watched it tremble, delicate, foolish, brave. And in that flickering shadow, I made peace with what I'd chosen. Not as sin, not as redemption, but as a step back into myself. That night I didn't sleep because of guilt. I didn't sleep because I finally realized I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I didn't fall. I stepped. I didn't get swept away by longing or confusion or some illusion of love. I opened the door, turned on the porch light, and waited. And when he came, I didn't ask him why. I asked myself why it took me this long to let someone see me, not as a caregiver, not as a shadow of someone's past, not as a role to be filled, but as a woman who still breathes, still listens, still aches. I didn't ask for permission, and no one offered it. But that night I gave it to myself. And for the first time, I wasn't Marion the nurse, Marion the widow, Marion the good woman. I was just Marion, and I did not apologize for it. There was a time I'd whisper my needs into pillows, fold them into laundry, press them into silent cups of tea. A time when wanting something was something to be ashamed of, as though hunger for connection made me weak, as though to be seen was a selfish act. But the truth is, we spend so long waiting to be chosen. We forget we can choose. We wait for someone to call our name. But what if the power was always in saying it ourselves? Wanting is not a crime. Silencing it is. And no, I didn't trade my morals for a moment of touch. I reclaimed the parts of me I had long buried under expectations and good intentions. That night didn't set me free. The choice to stop apologizing did. If any part of this story made you pause, if you recognize something familiar, even quietly, then maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think. You don't need to write a comment. You don't even need to say it out loud. But if you felt something, leave a like, not for me, but for the part of you that still feels. And if you've ever waited for the right moment to finally speak your truth, maybe this is it. We tell these stories not to stir desire, but to return something we've all given away too easily. Permission. To feel. To want. To step eyes open. Even if no one calls your name. Even if it's just you. Turning on the porch light. And leaving the door unlocked.